I pray that your Christmas holiday season was a blessed one. It certainly was for me. I got to spend time with those that I love, more important than anything else. And it happened to fall on a Saturday and a Sunday, and I was in church both days. A blessing of understanding why God sent his son as a human being to be born in a manger and to die for us for our sins. An amazing transaction that God has taken part in. But now we're a couple of days away from a new year. And if you're like me, I have great trepidation that 2023 is going to be a disaster. Not to hopelessness, but a disaster that leads to our blessed hope coming back. Possible that a rapture might happen at any moment in 2023. Things are happening in ways that we could never have expected it to be, except for the fact that the Bible is right. So I've just been thinking. And forgive me if this message goes a little long, if it's a little disheveled, a little scatterbrained, but I've just been thinking about some things as we go into this new year. And I felt it important to sit down and give it to you, because no doubt I have no idea where these messages go and what kind of an effect they have on you or others if you share them, but God knows. And my heart is only to use my gifts, to use my understandings, to use my passions, to sit down and share this information with you so you will be ready. There's a battle coming. There's a war coming. And the question is are you going to be ready? Because it takes training. Now, in the police department, we had training, we had experience, we had in-service dates, we had the academy to get us ready. And the whole point of that was to be ready when the proverbial difficulties came. We would be trained and ready to go when that happened. That's the whole point. Oswald Chambers puts it this way. It's in the spiritual realm as well. And this is from My Utmost for His Highest, updated edition, December 27th, where the battle is won or lost. And in part, Oswald Chambers says our battles are first won or lost in the secret places of our will in God's presence, never in full view of the world. He's saying, look, when you go up against the difficulties of life, your ability to win or lose remains possible based on what you've done up until that point in the secret place. Are you studied up? Are you prayed up? Has the Spirit been refreshed in you to lead you? Do you hear the still small voice? Because when the earthquakes and the fire and the whirlwinds all start to happen and chaos is all around us, God speaks to us in that still small voice. Remember what happens with Elijah. He continues, he says, I must first get to the issue settled between God and myself in the secret places of my soul. That is in prayer, in your closet, sitting down and meditating and reading and praying with God. You're not going to fix it out there in the midst of the chaos. You need to have it ready and focused before you get to the chaos. I must first get the issue settled between God and myself in the secret places of my soul where no one else can interfere. Then I can go ahead knowing with certainty that the battle is won. Lose it there, and calamity, disaster, and defeat before the world are as sure as the laws of God. The reason the battle is lost is that I fight it first in the external world. Get alone with God, do battle before him, and set the matter once and for all. Look, not often, but every once in a while, God brings us to a major turning point, a great crossroads in our life. From that point, we either go toward a more and more slow, lazy, and useless Christian life, or we become more and more on fire, giving our utmost for his highest, our best for his glory. This is my heart. My heart is to get into the conversation in the secret places. And that's part of why these teachings are so important. that maybe this is how you get into the secret place, but nothing can come better than sitting down and meditating, reading, and praying with God every day. I was thinking today as I was taking a walk today, that there's a difference between Christianity and religion. And I was thinking about pictures in my mind of men in robes and the pomp and circumstance of all of this religious stuff. People are like, wow, I'm not religious. Well, I'm not either. See, because Christianity is a relationship with the creator of the universe. It doesn't have anything to do with confessionals or reading holy texts or bowing down or doing all of this show, the stuff that we read, the music that we listen to, whatever. It doesn't have anything to do with that. What Christianity truly is sitting down with a friend who's having a hard time over a cup of coffee and counseling him on what God said about his situation. And I promise you, the situation is here in one way or another. We can find out what to do because the Bible is it's a working manual for life. And it's important to understand what's going on here. If you are studied up and set up and in the secret place and in the Spirit, doing what you need to do, in those times you'll feel his presence, not because it's some crazy God you can't see, but because he's closer than your next breath. A relationship of sitting down and having coffee with someone going through a hard time, sitting down and being joyous when someone finds out that they're in remission of cancer, sitting down and giving a hug or giving $100 bill to a man on a corner because you bought his Christmas, not knowing what his situation was, but God knowing, and you being ready to hear his movements in your life, to be obedient and to bless others. Nothing is different in our Christianity with God, with Jesus Christ, than we should be with our good friends and with those who are really close to. It's just a relationship, and we need to realize that. But a relationship that has a level of reverence, a level of glory that your friends don't have. This is the King of the universe, the King of heaven, the creator of all things. He created you. And to realize your relationship with him, to be so intimate with him that he knows more than you do, but you know him too. Well, this helps when you stand before him at the end of your life and he says, I know you, just as you know me. Enter into my kingdom. Well done, good and faithful servant. The words that we all should be longing to hear. So as we get into the word, I want to take you through a few chapters of the book of Daniel, because here is a man who was ready to go. Here is a man who knew who he was, because he had been in the secret place. He had understood and had prayed and given his life over to being completely observant to what God wanted him to be. And because of that, God used him in amazing ways. I also want to show you a man named Nebuchadnezzar. That man didn't understand these things. And he was so busy trying to do it on his own, even after very clear evidence of God's glory before him, that it cost him dearly for at least a good portion, a decent portion of his life, quite frankly. Let's get going. There's so much in this book. There's so much going on here. I'm reading in the New Living Translation. I'll bring commentary as we go. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. During the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. And then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong and healthy, good-looking young men, he said. Make sure that they're well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve with the royal palace. Train these young men in the language of literature in Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Now let's set the stage. We talked about this earlier, that Babylon came and sieged Judah and Jerusalem 3 different times over a period of about 15 years. This is what happened the first time they came. They took a lot of the good people, a lot of the treasure, they took all of the metalsmiths so that no one could make weapons and stand up against them, all of this kind of a thing. So he's saying he took the best of the best, the cream of the crop of these men, and he said, I want those people well-versed, well-learned, can read, they look good, they're young, they do all these things. They would look the part for working in the throne room of the king of Babylon. And we need to brainwash them. So he changes their names and he gives them certain foods to eat. He rations foods that no doubt will go against the Jewish dietary menu, that the kosher menu that we find in the first 5 books of the Bible, the law. And they're trained in 3 years to learn Babylonian language and to be ready for service in his court. So we find out that 4 men, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. And now God had given him, the chief of staff, both respect and affection for Daniel. But he responded, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I am afraid the king will have me beheaded. Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water, Daniel said. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of food and wine provided like the others. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom, and God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meaning of visions and dreams. And when the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar, and the king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. And whenever the king consulted them in matters of requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the 1st year of the reign of King Cyrus. Now, we meet these men, Jewish men, taken from their homes and brought into another world. Another world. It's not Jewish health anymore. It's not a Jewish place to be, to listen to synagogue, to follow the law. You are now in the hands of the king of Babylon. And so many of those who were Jewish men fell. They gave in to the world. They gave in to the world instead of standing up for who they were. But Daniel, Mishael, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel didn't fall for that. They didn't fall for that. Instead, they knew who they were. Now, we'll find out about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in a minute. But Daniel, I wanted to point to you, knew that he couldn't control everything because he was put in a place where he would very quickly get the eyes of the kingdom on him in a negative way. But he did, however, try to control what he could so that he didn't defile himself before his Lord. And in this point, it happens to be his diet. So he didn't want to eat anything that by Jewish law would bring him to a place of being defiled before God. This was part of his heritage. And regardless of whether it's that a big of a deal in this point, whether God was looking at it or not, Daniel understood that this was important to keep his language and his customs and his religious direction, his belief in God, his faith, his obedience, support his God in the midst of being taken into a different place, being oppressed by a different people in a different land. Now the question is are you doing the same thing? Are you being swept away by this world? This world is getting darker and darker and vehemently more amoral as we start to build tolerance for the things that God definitely said no to. Are you allowing that to sink into your heart, or are you standing strong? Well, this is a battle that you need to have ready in the quiet place first. Remember what Oswald said. Not often, but every once in a while, God brings us to a major turning point, a great crossroads in our life. From that point, we either go toward a more and more slow, lazy, useless Christian life, or we become more and more on fire, giving our utmost for his highest, our best for his glory. This is a fight you have to fight in the quiet place. Because when you are swept away and you're standing before this guy who's like, well, I have to give you this food or I'm going to die. And you say, you know what, let's have a wager on it. Let me do what I need to do, and let's see how it turns out. And maybe you'll find out that me following God in great obedience is going to put me in a better place. You see that these boys who didn't defile themselves before the king, they didn't tolerate the baloney that was coming at them because they were swept away and in another land. You've got a choice. You can be bummed, or you can just bloom where you're planted, and that's your choice. Be ready to bloom where you're planted because you don't know what's coming in 2023. Well, Daniel is put into royal service, and he's there all the way to King Cyrus, which means he's there the entire rest of the time that Nebuchadnezzar is in control. He's there for Belshazzar, I think Nebuchadnezzar's cousin. He's in his control for a short period of time. Then the Medo-Persian Empire comes, and he's there for King Darius and the Medes, and then for Cyrus of the Persians, and then he dies. He is there for the rest of his life. God uses him in tremendous ways. Why? Because he knew who he was. He didn't defile himself by all the stuff going around because he wasn't in the right place. He wasn't in the place he felt he should be, but he bloomed where he was planted, and God responded in like ways. Well, let's talk about a guy named Nebuchadnezzar. Here's a guy who has a completely different view of life, and he's the king of the most powerful nation on earth. Chapter 2, verse 1, one night during the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. And he called to his magicians, his enchanters, his sorcerers, his astrologers. And he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. And as they stood before the king, he said, I had a dream that deeply troubled me, and I must know what it means. And the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, "Long live the king. Tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means." But the king said to the astrologers, "I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your house will be turned into heaps of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means." Wow, they said to him, "Please, your majesty, tell us the dream and we will tell you what it means." You see what King Nebuchadnezzar is asking here? You guys are the cream de la crop of the sorcerers and magicians and wise men and enchanters and dark magic and whatever else you want to call it here. It's not the one true God, because that's not who they worshiped. They had other gods, and their other gods weren't real gods. And then they had all these special people who could, it's not much different than people that read tarot cards and palm readings and zodiacs and Ouija boards, and all of that stuff might give you some information, from the demonic world. You really need to be seeking after the one true God, the one God that's alive, because the demonic realm is going to explode as we get closer and closer to the end. Don't listen to those people, those demonic sides. The information they bring is not so good. So he's asking them, one, to tell him what he dreamed. Who can do that? And two, what does it mean? And he's so mad that it's a death threat. If you can't do it, I'm going to kill you. Nebuchadnezzar was a wicked and evil man. And they all know it. They know that this tremendous danger is lurking around the corner now. Verse 5, the king replied, I know what you're doing. You're stalling for time because you know I am serious when I say if you don't tell me the dream, you're doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind, but tell me the dream, and then I will know that you can tell me what it means. The astrologers replied to the king, no one on earth can tell the king his dream, and no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people. What's the point of believing in a God that's not right next to you, that's not listening to you, that doesn't worry about what you feel and how you are and what you're doing and where you're going and how all of this is going to end up? The God of the Bible counts our tears, puts them in a bottle, is closer than our breath, understands where we're going. He yells at us in our sufferings, and we feel his presence. When we look into the deep places and the dark places, when we get into the silence with him and fight these battles with him and him alone, so that we understand the God that we live with. We understand the God that we serve. We understand that our God is very real. He hears us. He answers our prayers. He has our best interest in mind. These guys are like, it's impossible because the God knows what you dream, but the God doesn't talk to me. Why would you want a relationship with a God like that? Other than the fact that you don't want to listen to what the gods have to say. You want to live your life for yourself. Nebuchadnezzar is doing that. These enchanters want to do that. But now they're finding out that there is a big gap in what they can provide when the king, who has the ability to kill them, is asking them for something that their gods can't provide. And by the way, there's a lot of gods out there that people look into now. Money can't fix everything. Power, prestige can't fix everything. Relationships can't fix everything. Having the most stuff can't fix everything. Only God, the God of the one true God of heaven, can fix it. The question is, who are you bowing down to? And what can that idolatrous God do for you? This is so interesting. It's such an amazing statement. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people. Weird. The king was furious, verse 12. And then he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. And when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. God is the beginning of wisdom, and God gives us tremendous discretion of understanding, of discernment, of understanding what it is, because we live our life led by the Holy Spirit and the Holy Writ of what is in the Bible, what God wants us to be in obedience, because we were there first in the secret place, so that when chaos shows up, we know how to handle it. We know who to lean on and who to listen to. Daniel's in a place here to handle the situation well. It says here he handles it, the situation, with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? So Arioch told him all that had happened, and Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dreams meant. And Daniel went home and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah what had happened. And he urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret, so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. And that night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Daniel knows that his God is nearby. Daniel knows that the God can provide the secret if he wants to in his will. He knows that his God lives among him. He understands that. Unlike the enchanters of Babylon, those gods don't live among the people. Daniel knows that his God does. And so he calls out to him. Why would you have a God that you can't call out to and expect an answer from in one way or another? I've called out over the last few years, especially as I'm working through my own situations. I've called out to him, and he has given me tremendous revelation, direction on where to go, how to look at things, how to handle people, how to do what needs to be done based on what I had read, what I had meditated, what I had prayed about in the secret place. I was ready. And when the opportunity came, God spoke through his word and through my heart, through the spirit that rests inside my heart, inside my body, inside me. So cool. Why would you call on a God that doesn't live among the people? This is a relationship with the creator of the earth, the creator of the universe. You should be able to call on your God, and your God should be able to come up. Remember Elijah? He's standing up on Mount Carmel, and they're all dancing and screaming and yelling and cutting themselves, and nothing's happening, and Elijah's making fun of them because their God's not answering. And then he calls to his God, and his God answers. Since fire burns up everything that was on top of the altar. Why would you go after a God that doesn't exist? That can't do anything for you. The Bible tells us even through the Old Testament. God says, "Why go after your gods that can't hear and can't see and can't do anything, and you need to nail them to the floor or they'll fall over and the wind will push them over." They're just stuff. They're just little trinkets covered in gold and silver, and they're not real. They're not real. Believe me, the God of heaven, the God of the universe, the one that so many people don't believe exists today, he's real, and he's telling us what he's doing right now. And he's going to come and get us out of here really soon. That's where our blessed hope is. That's where our hope in the midst of a trial, because we got together alone with him in the quiet place. And we know what we believe, and we know what we're doing. We know what we believe, so that if they come to my door and they need to arrest me and throw me in jail for speaking hate speech, I know why I believe what I believe. So Daniel calls out to his God, who is among them, who lives with him, who speaks to him. And God answers, and he reveals the dream. And of course, then Daniel, who knows his God and understands it's not him that it's God who did it. Praises God. Verse 19, that night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision, and Daniel praised the God of heaven. He said, praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He removes presidents, world leaders, and sets up other presidents and other world leaders. So if you're wondering why in 2016 a certain man won an election when it didn't make any sense, it's because God's in control. You want to know why an election in 2020 didn't really make any sense? Because God is in control. He rings up and puts down for his good pleasure. Don't forget that our nation is under judgment because of our sins. And who is in office now was placed there at God's judgment. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in darkness. Though he is surrounded by light, he knows all things. I thank the praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what he asks of you and revealed to us what the king demanded. And then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had ordered to execute the wise men of Babylon. Daniel said to him, don't kill the wise men. Take me to the king. I will tell him what the meaning of the dream is. And Arioch quickly took Daniel to the king, and he said, I have found one of the captives from Judah who will tell the king the meaning of his dream. And the king said to Daniel, also known as Belteshazzar, is this true? Can you tell me my dream and what it meant? And Daniel replied, I love the humble answer Daniel leaves to the king of Babylon. He could have said anything he wanted to in the midst of this. He's standing before a man who can immediately execute him right this moment if he looks at him wrong. And his answer is amazing. He says, Daniel replied, verse 27, there are no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or fortune tellers who can reveal the king's secret. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the future. Now I will tell you your dream and the visions you saw as you lay in your bed. Man, what a witness. Hey, none of these guys are going to be able to tell you any of these things, but there is a God in heaven who is revealing to you how things are going to be in the future, and I'll tell you what you dreamt and what it means. Pay attention. If you're Nebuchadnezzar, what are you thinking right now? You're thinking there's this guy. He could have said, I have your answers. I'm the one. I have the big deal. I am the real, in an effort to save his neck, but he doesn't. He says, none of these people here, me included, we can't tell you these things, but God can. There's a God in heaven who can tell you this. I'm going to tell you what he said. All glory and all honor and all praise pushed off to the God of heaven. Daniel could easily be dead, but he won't defile himself before the king Nebuchadnezzar here and take any credit for anything. The Bible says that God says, no one, I will share no glory with any man. And oh, how quickly when we see people like Herod later, who takes the glory on himself, or here in just a minute when Nebuchadnezzar takes the glory upon himself, what happens? God gets in there. No man will take God's glory. So he tells him, he says, look, I'm going to tell you, let me tell you what it says. Verse 29, while your majesty was sleeping, you dreamed about coming events, and he who reveals secrets has shown you what is going to happen. And it is not because I'm wiser than anyone else that I know the secret of your dream, but because God wants you to understand what was in your heart. It's not me. I have nothing to do with this, but God wanted you to know, and he's using me to tell you. That's all this is. God of heaven, whom you do not bow down to, wants you to know something, and he wants to reveal it through me. In your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you huge shining statue of man. It was a frightened sight. The head of the statue was made of gold. Its chest and arms are silver. Its belly and thigh are bronze. Its legs were iron. Its feet were a combination of iron and baked clay. And you watched a rock cut from a mountain, but not by human hands. It struck the feet of iron and clay and smashed them to bits. And the whole statue was crushed into small pieces of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold. And when the wind blew them away without a trace, like chaff on a threshing floor. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. That was the dream. Now we will tell the king what it means. Your Majesty, you are the greatest of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. He has made you the ruler of the inhabitant world and has even put the wild animals and birds under your control. You are the head of gold. But after your kingdom comes to an end, another kingdom inferior to yours will rise to take your place. And after that kingdom is fallen, yet a third kingdom, represented by bronze, will rise to rule the world. Following that kingdom, there will be a fourth one, as strong as iron, and that kingdom will smash and crush all previous empires, just as iron smashes and crushes everything it strikes. The feet and toes you saw were a combination of iron and baked clay, showing that this kingdom will be divided. Like iron mixed with clay, it will have some sort of strength of iron, but while some parts of it will be as strong as iron, other parts will be weak as clay. This mixture of iron and clay also shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron and clay do not mix. During the reigns of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed or conquered, and it will crush all these kingdoms into nothingness, and it will stand forever. And that is the meaning of the rock cut from the mountain, though not by human hands, that crushed to pieces the statue of iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. The great God was showing the king what will happen to the future. The dream is true, and the meaning is certain. Now, I have to stop for a second because that line is amazing. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar his dream perfectly. It is a prophetic dream of, at this point, what will happen in the future. He says that God has revealed that 4 kingdoms will come about. Those 4 kingdoms will then be crushed by God, and God will bring an everlasting kingdom. And that the dream is true and its meaning is certain. Now, it's important to understand that Babylon was the head of gold, and we find the Medo-Persian Empire, the chest and arms of silver. Then we find out that the belly of bronze and the thighs of bronze is Alexander the Great and the Grecian Empire. And then the legs and the feet are the Roman Empire. Now, interestingly, there's 2 parts to the Roman Empire. The legs, the lower legs of bronze, and the feet with 10 toes made out of iron and clay. We know that Babylon came, the Medo-Persians came, the Grecian Empire came, the Roman Empire came, and now we're waiting for the feet and toes of clay mixed with iron. That's the one part of this dream that hasn't been fulfilled yet. It's the 10 toes, or the 10 horns, the 10 leaders of 10 nations, or 10 kind of conglomerations of nation states throughout the world. Those people will give their energy, they'll give their power over to an antichrist. There is some talk that the clay is people, the iron is artificial intelligence, and there will be a melding of iron mixed with clay in these last days. That artificial intelligence will play a higher part in government. And if you read Revelation, it certainly seems like that's part of what's coming. So Daniel, we're sitting on the backside of 3/4 of this prophecy, all of which have come true in striking detail And now we're waiting for just the last part of it, a reviving of the Roman Empire with 10 toes or 10 horns to give it all to the Antichrist. Man, Daniel said that the dream is true and the meaning is certain. And 3/4 of it has become certain. And that, like I've said in the past, looking back at the past and seeing how things have come to fruition is prerequisite for us to look to the future and know that the last part of this prophecy will be done. The dream is true and the meaning is certain. Verse 46, the king Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel and worshipped him, and he commanded this people to offer sacrifices and burnt sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, truly your God is the greatest of gods, and the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret. And then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as a chief over all of his wise men. And Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court. Now, I just need to point something out here. It says here, Daniel was chief over the wise men. Where did the wise men come into the Bible? There was a band of wise men that came from the east, Persia. At this point, Babylon is not Persia yet. They'll be Persia when the Medo-Persian Empire takes it over. But Daniel, being a knower of the Bible, of Bible prophecy, understanding that the Messiah would come and that he would be under a star and that shepherds would do all. We talked about this last time. Daniel knew what to teach the wise men. So hundreds of years later, the wise men would have in their vernacular what they would be looking for when these things happened. And they go find the Messiah in a little town called Bethlehem. So good. See what happens when you know the Bible, when you get alone with God, when you understand what is written in this word, when you understand. So much is open to you. So much truth is opened to you. So good. Well, chapter 3, we're going to leave Daniel away for a little while, and I'm going to point out why Daniel's gone and why that's an important picture here in a minute. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are about to get themselves into a little bit of trouble with this crazy king who wants to just kill people because he's not happy. Now, don't forget that Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel because of this whole dream situation, and he praised God of Daniel. Now, keep that in mind, because when are we going to see Nebuchadnezzar get close to God? After seeing a miracle. A true miracle, in the midst of his own miracles. Why isn't he? Well, let's keep going. Chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, and he set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And then he sent messengers to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the providential officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. And so all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, an idol in the midst, something to bow down to that is not the God of heaven. Then a herald shouted out, people of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyway, anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now remember, Babylon is full of Jewish people. They were all pulled away in the midst of that when they went into the first siege of Babylon. They took all these people away. They're all living in this area. So he's saying, everybody over here, I don't care what your beliefs are, I don't care who you are, you will bow down to this statue, or you will face a fiery furnace. You will die, be executed, because King Nebuchadnezzar thinks he's deity at this point. Verse 8, but some of the astrologers went to the king and informed him about the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue, that they hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon, and they pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage. And in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego he brought before him, and they were brought in. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Well, didn't he just bow down to Daniel and the God of the Jews? Why is he forgetting this? Keep it in mind. Put a pin in it. Be right there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace and God, whom we serve, is able to save us, he will rescue you from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, he will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods and worship the gold statue you have set up. Chaos again. And these men knew who they believed, knew who they served, knew why? Because they knew who God was. They had been with him, followed him, studied the words, knew these things, been blessed by God, followed by Daniel. All of this stuff had become ingrained in their heart about who they are and who God of heaven is, and so they decide, look, we're not going to defile ourselves by bowing down to something that isn't our God. And he's saying, look, king, we understand what you're saying. We understand your threat. We understand what you're going to do. We understand all of this stuff. And our God can save us if he wants to. But even if he doesn't, well, we're not going to bow down to your stuff, because we believe in God no matter what happens to us. We believe in God even when he doesn't save us from something horrible. This is an important point we need to make about understanding who God is. Sometimes God doesn't save us from our difficulties. He walks with us in the midst of the trial. So Nebuchadnezzar's mad. He gets all infuriated with these three guys not playing into his deity. He's talking all big about the fact that no one can save him from his power. Ooh, God's taking notes in that. Remember that conversation that Jesus has with Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate says, don't you understand that I can free you or I can crucify you? I have the choice. And he says, you only have that power because God gave it to you. Remember what Daniel said back here? He's like, you raise up kings and you put down kings. Your power is given to you by God and God alone, because government is of God. We see that in Romans chapter 13. So here he is wrongly understanding of where his power comes from, where his blessings come from, who he is in the world and what's going on. And so he's saying, no one's going to deliver you from me. And they're like, well, my God can deliver me if he wants to. But if he doesn't want to, that doesn't mean, and I'm not going to change my mind in fear of man. I'm going to fear God, the one that can destroy my soul and throw it into the pit of hell for eternity. You can't do anything to me, Nebuchadnezzar, because even if you kill my body, I'll be in the presence of the Lord. I can't lose. And that will be my saving. So many times, sometimes we think we didn't get healed. But someone who with cancer who dies is healed. And we have to understand that God doesn't see this world the same way we do. It's just a stopping point for something more eternal, more serious. He's just given us the time that we have on this earth to learn about who he is, to see if we will follow, to understand who Jesus was and why we need a Savior. He doesn't expect us to be here forever. And when he's done for us here, we die. That's the way this works. Realize there's something better. So even in your suffering today, if God doesn't heal you, you will be healed someday. Just like me. Someday. And that day may be in his presence, but you will be healed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had fought this fight. They had been in that quiet place with God, so that when they stood before Nebuchadnezzar, there wasn't any question about what they believed and how they're going to react, because you don't win this fight if you're not ready in the quiet place. That's what Oswald Chambers said. The battle comes only after you've fought the battle with God and you have dealt with it in the quiet places. Then when you stand in chaos, you'll know where and how to proceed, believing in what God says. Well, here's Nebuchadnezzar in verse 19. He gets furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that his face became distorted with rage, and he commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. And then he orders some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. And so they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come out and come here." Wait a minute. Now he's calling them servants of the Most High God again? Like he is such a fish. He's just slimy. Talks all big here until now. This is the second miracle that's happening right in front of his eyes. And he looks in, they throw 3 guys into this furnace. It didn't kill him, and now there's a 4th guy in there, and something crazy is going on. And he's got to be saying, "Wow, what is up with the Jewish God? Man, our gods don't do this stuff." So he says, "Oh, you guys, servants of the, come on out. I think this is a trepidation statement. I don't think he's mad. I don't think he's angry. I think he's concerned. He's a little bewildered, maybe confused, as he's like, 'Hey, will you guys come out here really quick?'" And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. And then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not even touched them. Not a hair on their head was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." This is an important point that you get only when you spend time with the Lord. Because when we go into 2023, I can't promise you what's coming. I know what the Bible tells me, and it's going to be bad. No doubt persecution is coming. No doubt difficulty is coming for those who are Christians, who stand up, who have businesses that are going to come against, that the government's going to come against because they're signing bills like the Respect for Marriage Act. And look, Christians are going to come under great scrutiny. In UK, a woman was standing by herself, not talking to anyone, outside an abortion clinic, was arrested for praying in her mind. When the police asked her if she was praying, she said, yeah, in my mind. And they arrested her for that. Know that there never has been more persecution of Christians across this world than there is now. Know what you're going to believe. This is Nebuchadnezzar sees it here. He says, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants, also trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Jesus told us that if you want to lose your life, you will find it. But if you want to save your life, you will lose it. Realize why you believe what you believe, what you're willing to stand up for. Win the fight in the secret place so that when the chaos comes and you're standing before kings and you give an opportunity to give your faith and tell somebody what you believe in it, and it leads to the possibility of imprisonment or torture or death, that you understand who you serve. I cannot stress this enough. They defied the king's commands and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God, the only true God. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Now, I want to say a couple of things about this little ditty here before we close out, and we'll pick up on the next one in part 2. Interestingly enough, the Jewish people, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are thrown into a fiery furnace when they're asked not to. When they ask to bow down to someone other than God of heaven and they refuse, they are thrown into a fiery furnace, 7 times hotter than normal, much like a 7-year tribulation that is a judgment on the Jewish people. Now think about this. Where's Daniel? Daniel had been promoted into the kingdom and he's not mentioned in this story. Well, Daniel's a picture of the church. They were ready and understood who God was, promoted into the king's court, and he was off doing something else in the midst of this judgment. He's a picture of the church who will be raptured before the judgment comes against the Jews. This defeats any thought that the church has taken over and that God had turned his back on the Jews. That's called replacement theology. It's absolutely unbiblical because you can't expect to explain Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11, which explicitly says, I will turn my eyes back to the Jewish nation and they will understand who I am when this is all done. That's the whole point of the 7-year tribulation. So it's a picture, and it tells us the rapture comes before, because Daniel was gone before this story, that the 3 Jewish men, because they didn't bow down to an antichrist, will be persecuted. They will be thrown into a fiery furnace 7 times hotter, so that you see the picture. The picture's everywhere. And it's amazing. And think of one more thing. Nebuchadnezzar watches this again, praise God again, praise the God of the Jews again, sees another miracle he can't explain. He's going crazy in the midst of this. What do you think is going to take for Nebuchadnezzar to turn towards God? And we'll see that in the next one. Until then, be blessed.